And to you here in this movie theater, and to the others who follow this in other movie theaters and via Draken Film, welcome to this discussion. I'm turning there to see if Barak and Dov will show up. There they are, at least Barak. Welcome to Sweden. We're waiting for Dov. There he is. Well, I think that we owe them a warm hand, both of them, for the film to start with. Nice to have you here. You can hear us, obviously. Can we hear you?
1, 2, 3. Shalom.
1, 2, 3. That's it. And you, Dov. 1, 2, 3.
Shalom, Erev Tov.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening very much. I'd like to start with one question to you, Barak. It seems to me that Dov Hanin is a pretty well-known person in Israel. What was it that you wanted to show the Israelis that they didn't already know?
So first of all, before I answer this very good question, I want to thank you, everybody, who made it happen, this Swedish premiere of Comrade Dov. I'm very excited and very moved. And I want to thank Lina and Robert Weil about this whole organization. And this is a very big moment for me. So thank you all for making it happen. When I met Dov for the first time, it was at 2003. It was 17 years ago, and he was not even a Knesset member yet. And most people didn't know who is Dov Hanin. I didn't know who is Dov Hanin. But the editor of the newspaper where I used to work sent me because he thought I'm going to find him interesting. And not only I found him interesting, I actually, in some ways, fell in love with him. There was nothing erotic about this falling in love, but all the rest of the symptoms. And I just wanted to spend more and more time with this person. And mainly because it was very surprising for me to meet with someone who knows very, very, very well how terrible and racist and violent and depressing is the political situation in Israel and Palestine, yet keep the good energy and something which you can call optimism, but is very much connected to reality. And I just wanted to spend more and more time with him. And then after some years, I decided to start and document him. And it's true that you said what you said, that many people know Dov Hanin in Israel. But unfortunately, many people have completely misconceptions about his ideas. And many people think that he only cares about the Arabs, he only cares about the Palestinians, he doesn't care about the Israelis, the Jewish people, he's too far in the left, and is almost dangerous in his opinions and in his actions. And I'm very happy to tell you that after screening the film together with Dov, nearly 150 times all over Israel in the past 1.5 years, many people have changed their mind, not only about Dov as a person, but about the ideologic that stand behind of his actions. And this is why I made this film, and this is why I'm very happy with the effect of it.
One more question on that. What surprised you the most about the reactions that you got from the film? You as a filmmaker. I'll ask Dov the same thing then later on, but what surprised you the most?
What surprised me the most, and it maybe shouldn't surprise me, but we somehow tend to forget it, that most people, in many ways, most people are not so far from Dov in their opinions. Most people want to have peace. Most people want to have good life for themselves and for their kids. Most people understand that if the Palestinians will not have freedom and equalness and democracy and freedom of movement, then the Israeli people will also not be happy and safe. Most people want people who work very hard to earn more money, and most people agree with most of the things Dov is saying. But the main concern is that they don't believe it's possible. And I was surprised to evident the fact that people are seeking this hope so much. There is nothing people want more than to feel again that there is hope. And I believe that Dov is able to give it to them, and not from a childish or crazy way, in a very, very concrete way of understanding the reality very, very well.
Dov, I must ask you, that must be a strange feeling, being a politician representing a pretty small party in comparison to the big ones, and then feeling that everybody's just like you, and they think the way you think. Why isn't it happening then?
Well, first of all, I want to add my thanks to what Barak just said about thanking everybody involved in screening the film in Sweden. Answering your question, I would like to tell you that after the film was completed, we had a journey of more than 150 different meetings with people after screening the film all over the country. The film was screened many more times, but for 150 times, the screening of the film was followed by a discussion with very various types of audiences all around the country: Arabs, Jews, right-wingers, young people. And it was very, very moving to see the reactions of people. The reactions of people, even people coming from the right wing, meeting with me, meeting with the struggles we conducted at the Knesset, meeting with the ideas, and there were very, very moving reactions. Of course, reactions to a film, even when people tell you, well, this film actually changed my worldview, this is not really something that you can build upon. The feelings of people after seeing the film are sometimes very, very moving and very positive, but changing deep down feelings and opinions of people and political inclinations of people is something more complicated than that. But even though I think that the experience of meeting people after the film, for me, was very, very moving and very, very, very encouraging.
Have these reactions changed you in any way, in your views or in the way you see the world, the way you see Israel and its politics? Have you changed?
Well, in a way, the reactions that we met after screening the film, in a way, strengthened my understanding and my opinion that in Israeli society there exist not only grave dangers and problems. In Israeli society exist also real possibilities. There are people that we can persuade. There are people that we can, meet. And there are possibilities for real change in my society. And the reactions of people to the screening of the film in a way strengthened this belief.
We'll go on further with the discussion on the situation in Israel, but since we're in Sweden and we don't know that much about your party, the party you still belong to, I suppose, but leave as a parliamentary member. Tell us a little bit shortly about the joint list. How many are you? How many people have you behind you?
The joint list is not a party. The joint list is a combination or an alliance of 4 different parties. One party, my own, Hadash, is a leftist Jewish Arab political party. And the other 3 parties are parties representing the Arab minority in Israel. One of them is, I would say, pragmatic Islamist party. And the 2 other are variations of, I would say, national liberal parties of the Arab minority in Israel. There are differences even I would say deep differences between the different parties in this alliance called the Joint List. The reason why this Joint List was established in the first place is connected with something you've seen in the film, and that is the decision of right-wing government in Israel back in 2014 or 15 to raise the electoral threshold. The electoral threshold is the number of votes that party needs in order to enter the Knesset. And the electoral threshold was raised to a level that actually threatened both Hadash and the three Arab parties. And in order to stay in the Knesset, to stay represented in the Knesset, they had to make this alliance called the Joint List. At the moment, the Joint List has 15 members of Knesset out of 120. It is the third biggest faction in Israeli Knesset. It is a big faction, but its strength really is not really translated into a real influence upon the Knesset and upon Israeli government, because it is in a way kept outside of the circle of decisions. This is the Joint List. I served in the Knesset approximately 13 years. The majority of these years I represented only Hadash, which is much smaller than the Joint List. It's just one component of the Joint List. So I belong to a faction of 3, 4, 5 members of Knesset, and I left the Knesset as part of the Joint List because Hadash joined the Joint List.
This film shows you as somebody who loves Parliament, who loves Knesset. It's a song of praise to parliamentary work. Are you a good representative for this party and for its supporters in your praise of Knesset and the possibilities to do politics in Knesset?
Well, this is very, very interesting question. As a matter of fact, you are right. I think that the parliament is extremely important. And I think that the parliamentary arena is extremely useful for doing changes. You know, serving in the Knesset, I was able to pass through more than 100 different laws that are part and parcel of Israeli Book of Laws. These laws are very, very important ones, you know, including the Israeli Clean Air Act or the Polluter Should Pay Act, speaking about environmental legislation. I was, the initiator of changing or enlarging the maternity leave period in Israel for mothers. I was very much involved in other feminist legislation. I was, the initiator of legislation connecting the LGBT community in Israel, a successful legislation. I was the initiator of many laws dealing with human rights and minority rights in Israel. And I was able to push all these legislations through. So for me, being a Knesset member was getting the opportunity to be influential. And I think that as a Knesset member, I was really influential. I'm not sure that all the people in the Joint List have the same feeling. And I'm not sure that people in the left in Israel at large believe that the Knesset is as important as I believe it is. But my own experience is that this is a very, very important arena, and we can push through real changes through serious and difficult work inside the Knesset.
Barak.
Of course,
oh, sorry.
Walking inside the Knesset is very much connected with building struggles outside the Knesset. So it's always dialectical, using the outside mobilization and the inner possibilities inside the parliament itself.
Barak, you will have to represent young Israel. You're a bit younger than Dov, aren't you? What would your generation say about this? Are they as optimistic about the possibilities to make politics in parliament?
I'm afraid that most people around me, and especially young generation, are not as optimistic because they don't have too many reasons to be optimistic. Actually, as I said before, it was one of the reasons why I wanted to spend so much time with Dov, because I was already by then surrounded by lefties, by activists who became so hopeless and couldn't see future in Israel and became very bitter and aggressive, and I totally understand why. And Dov, for me, is representing something completely different. If this is how most people around me think and feel, no. I remember that one of the most touching moments for me in the filming process of Comrade Dov, even though it didn't make it to the final cut, was when I asked Dov at one point, it was in the West Bank, in the occupied territories, at the end of one demonstrations we went in Bil'in, and I asked him, Dov, I know how much you love your kids, how much you love your sons. Don't you wish for them as young kids, young men, to leave Israel, to go abroad, I don't know, to Sweden maybe, to Stockholm, to Denmark, to USA, to Amsterdam, to Mexico, I don't know where, just to live better life without the occupation, without all those terrible, racist, crazy things surrounding us? And he looked at me a little surprised, I would say almost disgusted by the question. And he said, of course not. I wish them to stay here and to fight for making this place a better place, because of course they can do whatever they want and I follow them and I support them. But if it was about my decision, I would tell them stay here and fight together to make it a better place, because this is the happiness in life. This is the satisfaction in life. This is the taste of life. To know that you do everything possible, you do your best to make the place you care the most about a better place. For your question, not so many people have this agenda, and it is only motivating me more and more to show this film in more and more places, and not only in the places of people who are lefties and people who have the same kind of ideologic like me and Dov are present, but also in many different other places. So it's a very strange day for me to answer this question. I just read in the newspaper 1 hour ago about terrible, terrible, terrible thing which Israel did just today by destroying those tents of those Palestinians and leaving 74 people without a home. It's not even was a home before, it was just a tent, temporary tent, including 41 young kids. Now it's the beginning of the winter. It's so brutal, it's so racist, it's so violent, it's horrible, horrible, horrible thing. So when you read it, it's very hard to stay optimistic. If to be honest, it's very, very hard.
Dov, just a personal question. Do your children obey did you take your advice? Do they stay there?
Well, let me begin with saying that this was one of the things that we always argued, Barak and myself, because when Barak started the film, he very much wanted to show my family, which is very, very dear to me, my children, my wife. And one of the things that was very, very important for me was to keep my family out of the film. And why? That is not because my family is not very important, but because my family did not really choose to be involved in the public arena in such a way that I chose. So I was very keen to leave my family, my children, my wife out of the frame of the film. But briefly saying, I would just say that I'm very, very happy with my family, and my children are in Israel, fortunately, and their families are in Israel. And I'm very happy with them and with the choices they're making in their life, both
But
morally, politically, and otherwise.
but you weren't surprised by the question, were you?
No, no.
It's a
This is
question that is
yes, yes.
put to a lot of young people in
Surely.
Israel. Why don't
Yeah.
you leave the country?
Yeah.
That's what we hear. That is just about the most depressing thing you could say about the country. That one of the most common question is, why don't you get out of it?
But my friend, let's just remember that there are so many amazing countries in the world that this question is very much relevant for them. Is USA at the last 4 years was a place you wanted to live in? Is Brazil a place you want to live in? You know, is Italy? What? Like there are so many countries around the world that are being dominant by horrible fascist liars. And I think that one should fight for his own place to make it a better place. It's a very tough job, but no one else will do it if we will not.
Okay, I'll go on.
Country has its own problems, you know. There is no paradise on earth. Each place you come, you will see that there are problems, there are issues, there is inequality, there is issues of racism, and you cannot run away from problems. You have to deal with them. You have to try to solve them. You have to engage. So for me, running away is not an option. I live in a quite complicated and difficult place, but I do not give up. I think that struggling everywhere you know, everywhere you are is very, very important, and not giving up.
25 years ago, these days, Rabin was murdered in Israel. He was shot. His idea or his dream was a two-state solution. You talk a lot in the film about the two-state solution. When we read about this, the events 25 years ago in our papers, the headlines are, "This dream is dead. It's over." But you still believe in it. How come?
Well, I think that the most important thing to realize is that in our country, the country we live in, there are two nations. There is the Israeli Jews and there are the Arab Palestinians. Both of them struggle for this country. Both of them love this country very much. And the only possible solution is a solution that will offer both nations the right of self-expression and the right of creation of a state. This was the principle in the UN resolution back in 1947, the creation of two states. One state was created, the state of Israel. The other, the Palestinian state, was not created. Now, as long as we do not solve the problem, as long as we do not solve the conflict, based on this very simple idea of justice and independence for the two people, we will not solve the issue of the conflict. There might be many, many difficulties ahead, many problems ahead, many obstacles ahead, but the principle of how you can solve the conflict is still one: justice and independence for the two people. Now, the details, the exact details and the exact nature of this solution can change, but the principle is the same: justice and independence for the two people.
But would you say we today are further away from possibility to realize that principle, or are we closer?
Well, I think that the last 25 years, as you said, created many, many more problems. For example, right-wing governments in Israel very much strengthened, with the United States support, of course, the project of settlements in the occupied territories. This is something that is really complicating the possibilities of achieving a just solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But if I take a real historical perspective, then I can also see the other side of the developments. I think that there is some kind of fatigue, both among Israelis and Palestinians, from the continuing situation of this conflict. And this fatigue is something that we can build upon. You know, there is not so much enthusiasm for war in Israel and not in the Palestinian nation too. And I think that more people in Israel realize that in principle you cannot avoid dealing with the Palestinians. In principle, more people understand that at the end of the conflict, there will be a Palestinian state alongside Israel. If you speak about 25 years ago, before Rabin was assassinated, even Rabin himself was very, very hesitant to speak about a Palestinian state. But since then, there were times that even Netanyahu spoke about Palestinian state. Of course, he didn't mean that, but he spoke about the Palestinian state. And that is, in a way, a manifestation of the slow movement of Israeli public opinion to understand that the Palestinians are here, they are here to stay, and every solution to the conflict should have an answer to the Palestinian issue. Now, as Barak said before, while in Israel still there is a majority of people supporting in principle the two-state solution, most Israelis do not believe that such a solution is feasible. They do not believe it is feasible because they believe that the Palestinians will not accept it. That is the damage created by the then Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who conducted discussions with Yasser Arafat, late Yasser Arafat, in the United States back in 2000, and came back to tell Israelis, well, I offered him everything, and he was not really willing to accept. And there is no partner. That is what Barak, who was the leader of Israeli Labor Party at the time, told Israeli public opinion. Now we know that this story about no partner and about the total refusal of the Palestinian leadership, the truth was much more complicated. Barak did not offer everything, actually offered some things that Arafat was not able to accept. And we understand now that this was a missed opportunity. It was not a situation where there was no partner to speak about peace. But still, many Israelis believe till now that there is no partner in the Palestinian side. And if there is no partner, then, well, the right wing is right. And we should rally around our leaders and prepare for the next conflict.
Amos Oz once said, I think it was during a visit in Sweden, maybe he said it elsewhere as well, that a moral solution or a moral dimension of the problem is the necessity of recognition of each other's wounds. There will be no ground for speaking if the Israeli Jews don't recognize the wound, the Nakba, and vice versa. If the Palestinians don't recognize the Holocaust, the big wound, the Jewish wound, there won't be any ground for politics. Would you agree to that? That this moral question, this question of recognizing the sadness, the sorrows, the suffering of the other, is a ground, the basic ground for politics?
I think it is very, very important. I think that, and actually this is one of the things also shown in the film. When I was a Knesset member, the Knesset passed a law prohibiting even mentioning the Nakba. Analyzing people who mention the Nakba or who make discussions on the Nakba in many ways. So I think that such moves are in a way very much contradict the very essence of moving forward towards reconciliation. Because reconciliation means knowing the other, knowing the pains of the other, knowing the wounds of the other, and trying to be part of the healing of the wounds of this conflict and not denying these wounds.
Who has the most reason to start this process of reconciliation, of recognizing the other? The Israeli Jews or the Palestinians? Or does it have to happen at the same time? Is there any way for anybody to start this process? There's a question for both of you.
Well, to my mind, I think that each step of or each move for understanding the other is something very important to the other side. You know, when I hear Palestinians that speak about the Holocaust, it very much strengthens my position as a moderate in Israeli society to speak with Israelis and to tell them, well, you see, there are Palestinians who know our own suffering in the past, and they can identify themselves with our feelings, and vice versa. You know, being an Israeli who recognizes the Nakba and who understand the sufferings of the Palestinians in the Nakba, and as such, meeting with Palestinians and speaking with them about the suffering of the Palestinian people in the Nakba, I see how moving it was for them to hear an Israeli speak about this. So it is, in a way, a mutual process where every one of us who make the right step is helping people on the other side to make additional steps from their own side.
Is there anybody that you can see? Barak, I'll give you a... Do you see anybody with the moral authority in Israel today to say, we should start? Would it be a politician? Would it be a writer or anybody else from the world of culture? Who, or a religious leader, who could take this first step? Because it's not really taken yet. You speak of experiences of those conversations, but it's really not taken yet, is it?
Every human being, every Israeli person, doesn't matter if he's from the politics, from the arts, from the press, from the media, from the sport, from the finance, every person in Israel who has any kind of influence on the society must do it, not tomorrow morning, tonight. This is the most urgent thing. It's influencing the life and the death of all of us here. And if you ask me who it will be, I have no idea. Right now, as I told you before, I'm not super optimistic. And even the people who are considered as so-called lefties, and many people see them as the hope of the Israeli Jewish left, every time when it comes to the money time, they are always going back to the same old syndrome of reminding everybody that this state is first of all and most of all belongs to us, the Israeli Jews, and that the Palestinians are second-level citizens, and the Palestinians in the occupied territories in Gaza Strip are not even human being in many ways. And this is the reality in Israel. It's very, very sad, and but this is, we have to face it. Of course, right now in the Israeli politics, the only person that I personally trust, I don't know, love, respect, believe in what he say and what he does, is Ayman Odeh, the head of the Joint List, and he's coming from the same party where Dov comes from Hadash, which is the only party which is truly Jewish and Arab together. And this is maybe the tragedy of the Israeli politics, that in the election of 2015, when Ayman Odeh, in the big press on TV with all the heads of all the parties, when he put his hand towards Aryeh Deri from Shas, who is the leader of one of the Orthodox Jewish parties, and told him, let's work together, let's make an alliance, you and us, because we have so much in common, Deri took his hand away. Because in many ways you could hope or assume that there are going to be many different kind of alliances like this. And this is very tragic and very sad, and I'm sure Dov has more interesting and smart things to say about it than me from his political experience. How comes that in a country like Israel, that so many people are suffering so much all the time from lack of security, and I'm talking also about the finance, people who work so hard, like Dov say in the film, and still stay poor. How comes they don't believe the good intention of the people who tell them that they care about them? I believe that the problem is those people, of those leaders, and not of the regular citizens of Israel. But maybe Dov can explain a little better how it comes, this syndrome.
Dov, I have to ask you a little bit about one of those leaders, your leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, because I read an interview with you in an Israeli paper where you said that Mr. Netanyahu is so resolute not to go to prison, and you said he would do anything to avoid going to prison. Nobody wants to go to prison, but very few have the means to stop going to prison as Benjamin Netanyahu. What are you afraid that he might do in order to avoid going to prison?
Well, let me just remind our viewers in Sweden that here in Israel, we are living in a very, very strange situation at the moment. Actually, Netanyahu is before a criminal trial. The trial should begin very soon in January on very, very serious criminal offenses of taking bribes and so on. This is a very, very strange situation whereby the prime minister is also accused on, very, very serious criminal charges. And one of the most important factor at the moment in Israeli politics is I would say, a resolute position not to enter prison. And in order not to enter prison, he, in a way, mobilizes all his political abilities. And he, in a way, create a political arena that is, in a way, kidnapped by his personal wishes. Now, when I say that Netanyahu is willing to do anything in order to avoid prison, it is, many, many things. For example, in the beginning of last year, when he conducted the election campaign, he conducted the resolute, racist campaign against the Arabs, the Arab minority in Israel. He went into broadcast to Israeli Jews, warning them that the Arabs are voting en masse. And this is a big danger for all of us. So you should run to vote and vote for me. This is, something really unprecedented in Western liberal democracies for a prime minister to behave in such a way towards a national minority. And he is, very extremely attacking all his opponents as collaborators of the enemy, as people who weaken Israel from the inside. And there is, of course, the danger that in order to get rid of these minor issues of criminal charges, he might also lead Israel to a big conflict. There is the Iranian issue, whereby Netanyahu is very much against the agreement that was made between the Western superpowers and Iran. And the alternative for an agreement might be a conflict. Now, this conflict is, of course, extremely dangerous for Israelis, for people in the Middle East at large, for people in the world. But for Netanyahu, it might be some kind of solution to his problems. So I think that at the moment, the fact that Netanyahu is Israeli prime minister is something very, very frightening and dangerous.
We're soon out of time. I just have a last question, Dov. You said in that interview you spend 17 hours a day and 7 days a week in Knesset. You'll be a free man now then. What will you do?
Well,
you have a big garden?
Well, actually, I left the Knesset not all in order to leave politics. I left the Knesset, but I'm still very much engaged in politics. I'm a part of a movement called Standing Together. I would ask every one of you, our viewers, to enter the internet and search for Standing Together. It is a Jewish Arab political movement. It's not a party. It is a movement that have at the moment more than 2,500 members all over the country. This movement is very, very much involved in the protest movements we have in the last few months all over the country against Prime Minister Netanyahu, against corruption, but even most important, against the policies of this government vis-a-vis our health, the economic situation, the coronavirus crisis, and so on. So for me, leaving the Knesset was something that I decided to do in order to be more involved in creating our political forces from below, from the ground, from uniting people, from uniting struggles, from uniting different groups in order to create a mass movement for political and social change in Israel. And that is something very, very demanding. And I still conduct many hours a day dealing with this endeavor.
But you don't have to sit on the Committee of Finances and fighting those battles. Anyway, thank you for joining us here, Dov Chenin and Barak Heiban, and thank you for making the film and teaching us a little bit new thing, or many new things about the situation in Israel. Thank you and good night to Tel Aviv.
Good night.
Thank you very much. Come to visit us. Come to visit.
Thank you. Thank you.